We thought we'd interview in front of the DeLorean.
Amazing.
It is the coolest prop I've ever interviewed
This is
from.
the coolest thing ever.
Okay, so Logan was a slightly dark tone.
Yes.
Deadpool Wolverine was a little more light, a little more fun. What was your reaction when you read the script of Deadpool and Wolverine?
Creasing with laughter the entire time. It was all code names, but it was still hilarious. And it was, honestly, it was just like a huge honor to be included in that. And all the cameos, when I figured out who everyone was so exciting. Like the whole Johnny Storm thing. I was just very happy to be a part of it.
As an actress, though, it was must have been really interesting to be able to explore your character 5 years later, take her in a different place. What was the funnest part about that, kind of getting to see her in a different world?
It was really cool to play Laura as a woman. She'd been a child last time I had played her, and to play her as a woman and under Hugh's wing again was really exciting, and kind of getting to work with him, and this time expanding into the MCU and working with people like Ryan Reynolds and Sean Levy and Channing Tatum and Jennifer Garner and Wesley Snipes and huge people like that was honestly just like a huge honor. Yeah.
Back to the Future's 40th anniversary.
It is.
One of the things that really struck me, the relationship between Doc and Marty is one of the most unique relationships we've seen on screen. Why do you think it's resonated so well with the audiences?
Well, on a certain level, Doc is the father that Marty doesn't have. And so Doc is the guy that does all the crazy stuff that your parents always told you never do that, right? So the idea that he finds this adult who does all this stuff says, okay, wait a minute. You can grow up and still be a little crazy, and it's okay. And Doc doesn't judge him at all. And so there's no judgment there. It was, the story of how they met was that Marty tried to sneak into Doc's lab. Doc found him in there and he said, oh, you made it, you figured out how to get into my lab. You want a job? So it's like, okay, yeah. And on a very sort of abstract level, when I grew up, my immediate next door neighbor was a professional photographer who had a dark room in his basement. And when I was in like second and third grade, he would let us come, my brothers and I, with our Brownie cameras. He'd show us, he'd develop our pictures in his basement, in his dark room. And for me, he was Doc Brown. He was the coolest guy I could ever imagine, to have all this great equipment and to make magic right there. So that was always in my head when we thought about Doc and his relationship with Marty.
Now, there's obviously well-documented a lot of difficulties making the film, well-documented. My question is, if you had a time machine, would you go back and change it to make it smoother, or do you think the difficulties were made Back to the Future special?
You know what? The lesson of Back to the Future Part 2 is don't mess around with the space-time continuum. So I wouldn't mess with it at all. The story has a really happy ending, right? I'm here 40 years later getting the George Pal Award. What could be better than that?
My question is, what was your reaction when you first found out you guys were going to break into musical numbers in Star Trek Stranger Worlds?
Well, I thought it was going to be like all jazz hands and sequins, and I was super excited. And then when I found out it wasn't going to be that, I was a little bit disappointed. I'm not now, obviously, because it turned out incredibly well, but it wasn't what I'd pitched. I was thinking dancing Gorn with top hats and canes, but yeah, it wasn't that, which I think is a good idea that it was.
But you actually went to emotional places in this song. It wasn't that. How did you feel about exploring your character, Spock, in that way?
Really nervous. Yeah.
But he did an amazing job.
No,
you did an amazing job.
Thank you.
So my last question is, the show actually, to me, honors the original series a lot in tone and stuff like that, but it's also modern. How did you feel when you first read the script about, portraying these characters? Because, this is a series is beloved, but, it's the critics are out there if you don't deliver what they're looking for.
Well, it wasn't so much of an issue for me because obviously La'an is a new character, so I think that's more for Ethan.
Yeah, I think you highlight the burdens perfectly, which is that there are a lot of people that love what came before. They're expecting something in particular, and they want you to deliver. And so the possibility of not doing that is really frightening, especially as a younger actor, so scary.
I did love your character, though, because your character had a lot of bite with a dark backstory.
Yeah.
Was that for you something that really interested you, playing something with a little darker past?
Oh yeah, for sure. But the darkness and the vulnerability and her fight to win over that is what really makes me love playing Lan.
Yes.
It's up to you. Do you want to do this question in song and dance, or do we do it straight?
I'm gonna do it straight. just
Okay,
because
perfect.
It's been a wild last hour, but if you'd asked me an hour ago, I might have done a song and dance.
I know, honestly. So what was your reaction when you were able to really explore character on Star Trek universe in a musical episode?
I was so happy because I'm a musical theater kid. So growing up, I loved musicals. I did musical theater in high school, and when I heard we were doing a musical, I was so excited about what song Ortegas was going to get. But Ortegas didn't get a full song, but she was still an important part of many songs, and she did have some great verses. But I keep telling everyone that I feel Ortegas is still owed a full song somewhere in the Star Trek universe. But no, for us and the whole cast, like anything that you do, and the fans can see it from the episodes. That like anything that is given to us, like so many of our episodes are genre based, right? So it's anything that we're given, we tackle with full force. So we were in rehearsal spaces over the weekends. We were in the studio singing, practicing. So I knew it was going to come off, without any issues. It was just a matter of what the story would be, and luckily for us, the story was incredible. But I was very excited for the challenge. I'd never recorded myself in a recording studio. But no, the way that it came out, I wasn't surprised that we all sounded amazing.
Well, that's what I did like. What I liked was it was actually trying to tell a dramatic story. It wasn't a gimmick.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was based in scientific fact, which I really appreciated.
So I'm assuming it's not based on real life, your character. I'm hoping. Partially.
I mean,
Or was it not an acting stretch? It was like, you know what? This is easy.
no. Ruth in Longlegs felt like an entity took over my body. It was the eeriest, most magical, and most cathartic experience of my career so far, to the extent that I haven't seen the movie because of that. So, she was a work of fiction, but she also had, I know, but there was something deeply ancestral about what was coming through, not in what she did. Thank God. I have no serial killers in my lineage that I know of. However, there was something deeply, I don't even know how to put words to it. It wasn't my voice coming out of me. It wasn't anything to do with me. I felt like all I did was do the work ahead of time and then just let her come out. That's all I needed to do. And with the guidance of Oz, who is right up there with my beloved David Lynch as one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, I didn't have to worry about a thing. I knew that Oz would take care of me, and he did, and everybody.
One of the important things, obviously, when you're dealing with a fantasy world and a dark character, you have to find the humanity in the character to play her. What was it for you trying, what human strain did you have to find to make her, in her own mind, she's a good person. She has to believe it.
She loves her
You loved
daughter.
her, so you focus on the love of the daughter.
That was the entire core of Ruth. This is a woman who loved her daughter and would do anything to make sure her daughter got to grow up. That's it. So she went to some extreme measures, but her daughter did get to grow up. And I know she lost her mind, but it all comes from that place. I think the relationship between a mother and daughter is the most complicated that there is, the most complicated kind of love, and that is the core of the relationship and possibly of the whole movie.
Well, she was protecting her in a way that I don't recommend. But there was humanity to her. This is why I found the movie very fascinating, because I felt like it wasn't just a cartoon villain.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I didn't feel for a moment that she wasn't real. She was intense. I loved every moment of playing her.
All right, so for you signing on, what was the most important aspect for you to capture in this story to make it different from the original, but also honor it?
Yeah, it's funny. You want to do what people are hoping for, but give them something unexpected. It's kind of ironic they're standing next to the DeLorean here, because I feel like this is what Back to the Future did. I made a list of all my favorite sequels, and the ones that I like the most are the ones that were trying something new. They weren't just full on just repeating what the last film did. They were trying something kind of original. So I'm like, oh, I think that's what I'm going to try to do with this film is try to have an original mindset versus like a sequel where I'm just repeating. And it was great for Riley, going and becoming a teenager because it's all about change. And so inherently, it kind of built in that kind of like newness to it.
Well, in the first challenge, it sounds like you have more characters in this one than the original. So each one has to have their own story arc. What were the challenges of developing that, but also making sure they all interconnect well?
It's a lot of work. Dave Holstein, one of our writers, is here today, and he would tell you that's incredibly difficult because it's such a large cast, and it keeps getting bigger. I kept thinking I was doing it's a lot like the Toy Story, universe where you want to add more toys. It's the same thing with emotions. You want to see more emotions, but then you're starting to get more characters, and you have a lot more work to try to make sure that everyone's storyline is feeding into the main one, but they're also having their own little storyline on top of it. Yeah, it's complicated. We had 9 new emotions show up in our first screening. It was way too many. I overwhelmed the audience. It was too much.
Well, that's interesting. So then, so for you, what was the challenge? Because one thing I love about Pixar is they never pull punches with kids. Like, they tell honest stories.
Yeah.
But for you, how did you want to balance not taking it too dark, but also not softening it too much?
Yeah, you know what? Tone. It's one of the things I initially thought about. I'm like, I want to make a movie that's fun to watch, but also has something really meaningful behind it. Sometimes there's been a lot of movies that you've seen where you're like, that was really good. And then someone will ask you, you want to see it again? And you're like, no, I don't. And I'm like, my favorite movies are the ones that you love to watch over and over and over again. So I wanted to strike a tone that wasn't too dark. I wanted to get into a little more serious subjects, but not so much that you didn't want to watch it again. And we did some screenings where it was too dark. And I'm like, I don't want to watch this movie again.
My final question, I love the music to this one, with Andreas' work.
Yeah.
And each emotion has its own song. What were your feelings on what the music added to your story?
Oh my goodness. It's, for a movie about emotions, it's, the score is what brought the emotion.
Right.
And I really felt it when I was there on the scoring stage, listening to all the work that Andrea had done. Beautiful work, and I couldn't believe how much the movie jumped emotionally just in that phase. You recorded over the course of really a couple weeks, and the leap that it took was gigantic.
Inside Out 2.
Heard of it?
Yeah. It was like the first one was a small indie film, if I recall. No one saw it.
Sure,
So
it was
yeah.
a minor
blip on the radar. Awesome movie. All right, so for you, taking the character, you're aging the character obviously a bit. What was the biggest challenge adding more emotions to it, but without drowning the character in the movie?
I mean, you said it. I mean, there's you only have so much real estate in the film, and it is Joy's movie. At the end of the day, she's the main character, and so you have to carve out first a tranche for her, and then Riley, and then sadness, anger, all your favorites from the first movie, disgust and fear, and then it's like, well, wait. As she's growing, there's a natural instinct to grow the movie and to find more space. So there were a lot of characters who were added and then cut. There were characters who stayed because they just had the perfect amount of real estate to impact ratio, like Nostalgia, who has just a great entrance and a great exit. But it's not easy, I'll tell you that, because you do have to give everybody their own arc. You have to give, Iowa Berry, you have to give her character a 3-act play to deal with, and so it's not.
So then it was a twofold process. A, each character have his own story arc,
Yeah.
and then B, they all have to interconnect.
Yeah, everything in this world has to intersect, which is I think the hardest part of writing into the Inside Out films, is that it's this 3-dimensional chess game you're playing where what's happening with Riley, what's happening with Joy, what's happening with anxiety, all those stories have to move at a pace where they are affecting each other and climaxing at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so that is a very, you have to make it look easy, and it's probably the hardest part of the whole thing.
One thing I love about Pixar and Inside Out specifically is you guys don't shy away from doing real drama. Like we're kids. But for you, what was the balancing act for that? How far you want to push it? And it drowns out the comedy, but also you don't want to soften it.
No, it's a great balance. I mean, I think earlier versions of the film dealt with shame, which felt like it was pulling us a little too far into a dramatic space. And anxiety felt like a great way to be able to embody a feeling that could be both humorous and break your heart. So we landed there. But yeah, no, it's a tug of war between happy and sad, as is the case in Inside Out as per usual.
Yeah. I actually, and for you as a screenwriter, how did you feel when you watched the movie, but you're seeing all the great music for this one and each character having his own music? What was your feeling on her wonderful music work?
I mean, my background is musical theater. I love what Andrea did in this film. I mean, she really just killed it. It's such a beautiful orchestral complement to the original theme, which was written by her husband. So it's just a wonderful story. I love the music in this movie.
When you first sat down to write the script, what was the biggest challenge writing a script that the character doesn't really speak a lot?
You know, we had about 50% of the dialogue an animated film would normally have, and all that came out of me trying to clear space out because I didn't want the movie to feel like it was on a schedule, like it was being pushed along artificially, because the situation with the robot who's lost, who doesn't know she's lost, you want things to unspool the way they would naturally feel. So a lot of my very first job was to clear out space so that we had these open spaces for the resonance of the emotion and for the core relationship, which is between Roz and Brightbill.
One of the challenges then is when the audience knows something that the character doesn't, is balancing that act. So the audience is like, please catch up. But in this one, it was paced perfectly. How did you approach that, making sure that it wasn't, you know what I mean, that the audience wasn't getting frustrated?
This is where I must give a huge amount of credit to our editor, Mary Blade. The opening sequence was actually the last sequence that went into production, the one where she walks to the island. It was the hardest one to really nail down. There are certain story pillars, load-bearing pillars that you know have to be there. So, for example, we know that Roz is going to have to run across a goose's nest. That's going to stay. So that goes into production very, very early because we know that's stable. But the hardest one, and Mary told me it was 100 iterations until we found the right one that we could put into production, the opening sequence. So working with Mary, finding that pace is a years-long process. It is her art.
All right, so then what was your reaction when the first time you saw it on the big screen with an audience?
Oh my gosh, with an audience, a huge thrill. Of course, I was terrified, nervous, but to see them respond was the most rewarding thing in the world. You get to that point where you don't know. You don't know, and you're just hoping. And you do have test screenings along the way, and during those screenings, you don't even have to get to a moment before you feel like, oh no, I did it wrong. I need to change it. And sure enough, you get to that moment, it doesn't work super well. It keeps you honest on the way there, but to be there with the final thing and have them respond is literally the best thing in the world for a director.
So we're going to go back to old school animation, hand-drawn question. What was the process for you like drawing for Little Mermaid?
It was interesting because I had just come off a huge success. The movie that I worked on before The Little Mermaid was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was animated mostly in London with a studio there, a Disney studio there. And as you know, it was a huge hit. So you're still on this high. And then I came back to Burbank, and then they said, Andreas, now we're going to do here The Little Mermaid. Would you like to animate King Triton, Ariel's father? And I said, of course I would. And then it turned out, then the more I found out about that character through storyboards and listening to the dialogue, he was sort of like my own dad. My dad was also kind of strict with my sisters when they grew up and when they started dating. So a lot of the situations you see King Triton in with Ariel happened at home when I was a kid and my sisters started dating.
So that must have helped you kind of grounding it in the real world.
It is always interesting and I think helpful when you can base your animation on real life, on real experiences, because then it has that much more authenticity. I told my dad years later that King Triton is based on him, and he didn't know if that was a good or a bad thing.
So I argue Little Mermaid is the best soundtrack ever for a Disney movie. I think the music is wonderful. What was your reaction the first time you saw the music over what you animated?
Well, we were all just blown away, not just at the end, because even while we were working on it, we have these demos of these songs, and they sounded incredible, like the best that we have heard, and really as good as the old classics. So now it was like, okay, the quality is really going up here in terms of music and writing, because the story was also coming along. Now we have to up our game and really fill it out with great animation. Yeah. So it was a little bit of pressure.
For last question, because you mentioned Roger Rabbit, which I was going to ask you about anyway. That movie was very complicated. The first time trying to mix animation, live action with no CGI, students they would not understand that. What was the biggest challenge for you trying to pull that off?
The easy part on working on a character like Roger Rabbit, or even the other characters, I worked on several others on the film too, the easy part was really animating them, because that's a style of animation which we call old school Hollywood animation from the 1930s, 40s. The animation is very squashy, stretchy, a lot of fun, but plugging in that animation with live action characters and their performances, because the live action was shot before the animation came in, and these actors, they had to imagine Roger Rabbit standing right here and then talking to him and making that up. And then we plug in the animation. That was complicated.
And you had to match to the live action. Like, yeah,
100%.
like, you know.
Not only putting the rabbit and talking to Bob Hoskins, but the camera was also moving slightly often. And then that meant we have to also change the perspective of the rabbit.
Yeah.
As well as the acting. So it really wasn't easy, but it was so worthwhile, because when we saw the movie finished, we knew we were something new. We were doing something new.
Okay, so Masters of the Universe, kind of challenging to come on board this. It's a beloved show.
It is. It is.
What was it about you that wanted you to do this project?
I mean, the thing for me that was so awesome was that I happen to know some of the writers on the show, and I trust them. Kevin Smith was at the helm, and I trust him so much, and I was lucky enough to get to work with him a couple times before this project came up, and Marc was one of the writers on the first season, and so I knew what we had as far as the story was going to be incredible, and I grew up loving Master of the Universe. I mean, I had an action figure in my third grade photo. I had a She-Ra action figure in my class photo. So my mom joked, she's like, I think you manifested this from a very young age. I was like, I think I did too.
All right, so for you, what was the challenge of adapting it? It's a beloved show. What did you want to make sure you captured from the original show, but also make it your own?
I mean, I think that what we were trying to do was make sure that it felt real, and it felt like drama, because those shows were dramatic when you were a kid. They weren't a joke. They were legitimate, like, you felt for those characters. There was peril, there was action, there was all those things. And so making sure that this version was not a joke also. That we treated everything just as seriously as we would think it was. It was Shakespeare to us. So why pretend otherwise?
And also I got an action figure, so how can you say no to that?
One of us got an action figure.
All right, I have one question about work for each of you. Guardians, what was the experience like? How did it feel joining that universe?
It was incredible. I feel really lucky again that so many people in this industry that I've gotten to work with have been friends. And so I had met James Gunn through friends years before. And I'd never worked on anything with him as an actor, but I'd been hosting projects like doing, the Suicide Squad press conference and things like that. So we knew each other peripherally. And so when this opportunity came up, I didn't hesitate. It was like, yes, I will go to Atlanta. Yes, whatever you need me for. And so it's really awesome when you get to step onto a big project like that and feel the comfort of having friends there already.
And for you, one of the most emotional moments for me was Star Trek Picard, seeing the original set, the actors together on the original Enterprise set again. What was it for you when you saw that?
I mean, I was the first show that I fell in love with as a kid with The Next Generation. And I was an intern on Next Generation and when I was in college. So 25 years later to come around to be in a place where I could write Interior Bridge Enterprise was the most ridiculously surreal, wonderful thing that has ever been or ever will be.
Okay, so I always have a question, especially of talent. Unholy Song. What was it about the script when you first read it that emotionally grabbed you and wanted you to play the parts?
Oh, the plot. I was not expecting, especially for my character. As soon as I read the plot and her arc, I was like, that's it. I want that. So that was really exciting.
They called me up and they said, Eric, would you like to play an exorcist? I said, yes, please. I mean, you go back to Max von Sydow in the original Exorcist, and it's kind of like it's a dream role for an actor. And this particular story tells it's from the Bible. It's the greatest exorcism story in the Bible. It's the miracle of the Gerasene demoniac in Matthew. And we recreated it in Northern California. Jessica inadvertently lets the demons out. They have to call me as the exorcist.
Of course.
This is the prop I use in the movie.
Oh, awesome.
And now we're using it to try to protect against bad reviews. I'll let you know if it works later. But we're excited about the film. We're excited to be here at the Saturn Awards. I actually haven't been here since 1992 when I won a Saturn Award for the movie Soul Taker.
Oh, yeah.
So it's been a while, and it certainly has changed. I mean, it was like a small dinner party, and now it's a major worldwide live-streamed event. It's just
All
amazing.
right, so for you, what was the most challenging part of playing your character?
I I think the background for the character was really personal for me, so it was a little difficult to get into it, but still, as an actor, it's a process that we gotta go through. So I think her background was the most difficult part.
Jessica, I just had to brag about her. She plays a woman who has a really abusive husband, and she's escaped her husband and staying in this house. She's rented a room in the house. And in the movie, the demon poses as her husband and tackles her and beats her up. And the next day, after they did the scene, she lifted up her dress to show me her knees were so bruised.
Yeah.
And I said,
I gave my sweat, blood, and tears for it.
and I said, why didn't you use a stunt pad? She said, well, I wanted it to look more realistic. It's like, well, that's why they have stunt pads, you know.
Now, I'm going to guess that you never was possessed by demon. I'm assuming in real life. I'm assuming.
Not that I can remember.
Not to remember. But does it help having, like, so you're in this fantasy world, obviously, but does it help having something grounded, talking about a real issue like domestic abuse? Does it help you ground the character so you can explore the fantasy world?
It does. I think it always helps to have like something to ground yourself as an actor for the character. It's always so helpful to develop this story for the character throughout the movie and the arc. It makes a big difference.
Same question. I assume you never performed an exorcist?
No.
So, but how is it for you? But it is based on real life. I mean, there are real elements, so did that help you too get into your character?
It does, and they gave me some really cool props besides obviously the cross. I had this really ancient Bible that was supposedly stolen in the movie. The back history is it was stolen from the Vatican Library, and it's a book of casts and chants and stuff that help capture the demons. And so that was really an interesting, fun and thing to learn. I had to learn dialogue in German and dialogue in Latin.
Yeah.
And I was like, casting out the demons in Latin. It was just a fun kind of challenge as an actor, something different.
Okay, so what about Chucky? We're going to go back to the beginning for you and Chucky.
Okay.
When you first read the script, the first pilot script, what was it about it that made you really want to play the character?
Well, okay, it's actually a testament to Don's writing for the character, but I felt that there was so many ways that people could relate to the character, from anyone, from all backgrounds, all situations. You could somehow relate to Jake or any of the other characters for that matter, and that's what initially brought me, drew me in for the part, but yeah.
So to do a fantasy script like this, like Chucky, it's a surreal moment. Do you need to have something real in there emotionally so you can put yourself in this world, but actually deal with real life emotions?
Yeah, and that's actually what I like about the show is that it takes these. There's all this crazy stuff happening, but yet we still have these humanized moments between the characters. And I was bullied in elementary school and a little bit of middle school before I was homeschooled, but so I guess I put, the Jake is obviously, he's a bullied character in the show, so I guess I was able to kind of relate that myself to the character, but yeah, you definitely have to find some realism among all the craziness.
And I think that's actually one of the things why the show is so appealing, because we do relate to what you're going through. We've all felt it, and I think that's why it's such a testament to the show. What are you most excited about for the future?
For the future, well, I can say that. Oh no, you're all right. No, you're all right. I will say that Chucky always comes back. Don's working on something, and I called him to make sure that I could say that. But yeah.
Okay, so all right. So why did you want to tell this story?
It's a really fun genre exercise. But at the heart of it, it's about a woman that's picking herself up after the lowest point in her life. So it's about a woman that gets dosed by a paralytic agent while this predator is chasing her. But along the way, it's about her discovering that she has to fight in order to want to live again. For us, that was a really great experiment to see whether or not we can tell a story like that, make it engage, but also hit you in the heart. That was the interest. That was what intrigued us.
And that sounds like the emotional truth, because it seems a little fantasy-like, or a little, but is the emotional truth is what helped you get through the story?
Absolutely. I mean, the film in itself is a genre exercise about a woman who gets, like he said, gets dosed with a paralytic and has to try to survive a killer as her body is shutting down. So it was fun to try to think, can we do that? Can you have a character that's paralyzed for a majority of a feature film? But it wasn't until we came up with the character of Iris, our main character, and her journey, and the emotional resonance that her journey would carry through, that we actually went, okay, this is a movie that we could make, and a movie that would hopefully sit with people and they could pull something from it. So yeah, it wasn't until we came up with the character's journey that it actually became a film.
It's interesting because if you're limited physically, it must be, but it also amps up the other drama and a lot of the emotional aspect, which tells a much different story than we're not accustomed to.
Yeah, I mean, it was a challenge for our actress, but then it also meant that her predator, it's a two-hander, right? So our predator, the killer, then has to take up a lot of space, and he has to be the one that we're following while she's paralyzed. So it was a really interesting experiment. We wanted to know whether we could pull it off. Sam Raimi produced it with us, and so he and his partner Zainab Azizi, they are our idols and our partners, and it was great to have them, go on the journey with us and see, we pulled it off. I mean, by most accounts, we pulled it off.
I'll give you a list. So what was the most challenging scene to shoot on set then?
It was there's a portion, and not giving anything away, but there's a scene in the film. It's at the very very beginning of the film that takes place on a cliff, and it was our very first day of shooting. It was a shortened day because we were 3 hours outside of base camp with no trees, and our DP's looking at bright sun that's moving across the sky, and we're trying to match it. So that I would say was the toughest day, just because of first day. And everybody getting to know each other.
And our actors, our actress was afraid of heights, and she's strapped in to a cord to make sure she doesn't fall over the end.
Kelsey Asbill.
Who does an amazing job. Finn Whitrock, who is the predator, the killer, the two-hander. So, yeah, that was the most challenging day.
When you first read the script for From, what was it emotionally that grabbed you? Said, you know what, I want to play this character.
What grabbed me? We got the script right in the height of the pandemic, right? And the story in From was about these two different parts of the same town where people were deciding how they were going to live through this nightmare of some scary monster that they couldn't define. And it made sense to me. Like every bit of it made sense. Like they live separately, but the truth is they can't survive without each other. And I was like, I'm in. Put me in, coach. I want to do that. I want to tell that story.
Now, as an actor, is that what you need? Because you do like fantasy and sci-fi. You clearly like it. But do you need that one emotional thing or something to carry you through the fantasy world, to ground you enough to say, I can't play this character unless I know who he is?
Exactly. Because I think that the thing that makes fantasy work is if you're able to see the humanity of the characters, I think. Some people have other ideas. Even when they're like monsters, if you can understand how they feel, you're more connected than you are not when it's just like, I'm scary, I'm gonna eat you. Like, who cares?
My last question, because I just have to ask, I'm a big Lost fan.
Okay.
You had one of the biggest twists ever, I would argue, in TV show when you turned around and killed Anna and Louisa. Like, we loved your character. We understand why you did it. For you, what was your reaction emotionally when you found out that's what they were gonna happen?
I go back to, I was pretty much in shock, and I was like, oh man, that's gonna be wild. I think you can even see it because they didn't tell. Nobody knew. Right. I knew, she knew, the writers knew. So the day they set it all up, they even were like, wait, what are we setting up? And then they told them, and so for all of us, it was really shocking and emotional. And that turnaround is just like, it still gets me. It's really, it was really shocking. It was really shocking, and so she was such a great sport to do that. And then the Libby bit of it.
Oh yeah.
That was off. Then it was off the rails at that point. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Man. Thank you for letting me hang out.
Of course.